Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Rundown. I'm Sunny Galt. I'm a messenger with United Network News, and we are the news division of United Network. And each and every week, we bring you the real news. And we do that because we release a ton of content throughout the week that includes in-depth news coverage. And we have local stories that are told through the eyes of our field messengers. We have coverage that our team puts together based on some headlines that you may see out there, but we go more in depth. And we try to give you the story behind the story. We talk about the restoration of our planet as we create what we call the new Earth. And we also have updates from the Global Intelligence Agency of what is really happening here on this planet right now in what we consider to be the ultimate battle of good versus evil. So if you want more information about who we are and what we do, you can visit our website at unitednetwork.earth. This podcast is a week in review, so I take a look at all the stories that we've released throughout the last week, and I give you highlights. It's a great way to catch up if you missed any stories throughout the week, because I know there's a lot of content that we typically put out, or if you want to share UNN with somebody else. Because when we put our content out, at least for the first week, it is behind a paywall because we do not work with advertisers. We are working directly with our members to provide you with this information. So our members get exclusive access to everything for the first week, and then we put our content on YouTube and Rumble, but we cannot guarantee that it stays there. So you're more than welcome to check out our content about a week later if you don't mind waiting a bit. But regardless, whether you're a member or you're seeing our stuff online for the first time, I encourage you guys, think critically and ask questions. So when you hear us talk about something, do a little bit of research yourself. Check in with your inner guidance, which I believe is your discernment. You do have the ability to understand when something is accurate or not accurate. It is a frequency. And the more you tap into that, the more this whole world will start to make a little bit more sense. And you'll know instantly if the information that you come across is real or not, and how that applies to your life. We're here at a very interesting time on this planet, and we're learning as we go. And so it's really important to check in with that discernment. And then when you do discover new things, share that with other people. And when I say that, that doesn't mean try to pound it into someone's head. Anyone that's been awake and aware for a period of time has probably learned this the hard way, and that is you cannot force people to accept this information. Everybody is on their own path, they're on their own journey, but sometimes you have to hear things multiple times, and for some people, maybe even over the course of multiple years, but someday it's going to click. And then they'll probably remember, oh, so-and-so told me about that, and they'll start to put the pieces together. So while it is our part of our journey to share what we know, it is not up to us to have anything to do with how someone takes that information and what they do with that information. Okay, you are simply a messenger. We say that on United Network News all the time. We are messengers of information, but you cannot control what people do with that information once they have it. And it kind of lets you off the hook a little bit, allows you to share freely and not worry about what happens after that. Okay, no real announcements, except I am recording this again on a Sunday. It's just been a weird couple weeks, guys. So I do plan to get back on, recording and trying to release this on Saturday night, but it hasn't happened yet. Maybe next week. All right, here's the rundown of stories you may have missed this week on UNN. Let's talk about our incredible field messengers. These are people who just want to share what's going on in their community. We believe the best way to break down narratives, whether it's coming from mainstream media or alternative media, there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation out there, and we believe the best way to break all of that down so you really know what's going on is for us to start communicating with each other more. And yes, tell us what's going on in your backyard. That could be more news focused, it could be more community focused. It really just depends on, what you want to share. So let's talk about some of the stories that were shared this week. We're kicking things off with Rick, and he is based out of Arizona. It's a state in the United States. And he talks about the Military Support Foundation, which is based in Phoenix. And they offer care packages and resources to active duty military personnel and their families. So he goes and basically takes us behind the scene. We talk with the founder of this foundation and learn a little bit more about what they do. So I believe it's like once a week. They do provide food for these families. They also cover them during special holidays. And when the soldiers come home, they have a special get together, I guess you would call it. They make signs. They give the people flowers to give to the soldiers as they're coming home, and really just helps these families that may be in need while their family members are away. Emma from Spain talks about Canary Islands Day. So this is a day for the Canary Islands. It's celebrated annually. They've got music and dancing and food and various traditions to honor their unique culture and history. So Emma shares some of this history with us. And if you haven't ever done a little bit of research on this, I think the Canary Islands are very interesting. So technically they fall under Spain, but they have their own government. They have their own flag. In fact, I believe, was it May 30th? I want to say it's May 30th is the day, the Canary Islands actual day, where all these festivities take place. And the reason they picked that is because that was the first day their parliament met to, establish their government and to talk about things related to their government. So just a very interesting place. Again, we're getting to know each other a little bit better. Maureen out of Uganda shares a borehole with us. Now, it kind of sounded weird when I said that. I'm like, how do I explain this? Okay, it's easier when you have visuals, guys. So a borehole water pump specifically is what she tells us about. And this is one way that people in this Eastern Ugandan community get their clean water. And, it's interesting, here in the West, a lot of times we're just turning on faucets in our own homes, and we forget that getting access to clean and safe water is not so easy in other countries, depending on where you're located. So again, does this need to be improved? Of course, but we have to start with knowing what's going on in other communities. So it's literally, and by the way, I did some research on this because I wanted to know really what a borehole was. So a borehole is a narrow hole that is drilled deep into usually an aquifer. And what's really interesting about that, it's a little bit different than a well. So a well would be more shallow, and the borehole is deeper. And what's really interesting and positive about that is as water comes up, because it's deeper, it's going through multiple layers of rock and soil, which acts as a filter for the water. See, Mother Nature always has the best resources for us, right? We go to the store to buy a filter when really if we were just getting our water the more natural way, we probably wouldn't have to deal with most of that, right? So very interesting. Could this be improved? Of course, but we're meeting people where they're at and just learning a little bit more about their communities. All right, Gary out of California, another state in the U.S., talks about fire season. So this is more of a newsy story, and depending on, where you're at in different parts of the world, you may have more natural disasters happening. In this case, he got a fire evacuation alert. He was in Redding, California, and he gives us updates on what happened throughout the day. So he literally starts with the notification on his phone. He takes us outside. He shows us how there's this plume of brownish, blackish smoke in the sky. And he shows us throughout the day how conditions improved. He said there were planes and helicopters dropping water, and he shows us all the dry land around. I think it was at a campsite. A lot of dry heat, he says, and just tells us what he, personally experienced, which is what our field messengers do. Amy, who is typically out of New Jersey but was visiting Connecticut, shows us how they make maple syrup, which is very interesting. So we know that it comes from trees. You've probably heard it has something to do with sap from these maple trees, right? Maple syrup comes from maple trees. And it's a very interesting process. on how this works. So essentially, what we see through Amy's video is there's all these different trees. She shows us how they basically tap into the tree and how it really looks more like a liquidy, watery substance. It doesn't look like, sap coming out of the tree. It's a lot more thin. It really looks more like water. So they have these buckets that hang from the trees, and that's if it's on level ground. If not, there is a more elaborate system that connects these trees together, actually uses gravity, but it ultimately ends up, at least in this area, in what they call a sugar shack, which is really cute. It's just a small little building, and there is an evaporator in there. So it's wood fired, and it basically removes the water from, that was created, from, or gathered, I should say, from these various trees. It removes the water, and that's how you start to get the thicker syrup. But it's not that easy. She said there's multiple things that have to happen to make sure it's not contaminated and, dangerous for people. But you still kind of see part of the process, We open our pantries, there's the syrup, and sometimes we just don't understand how it gets there. So I love seeing the full picture. Thank you, Amy, for taking us through that whole experience. All right, Kim out of Oregon. She shows us how to make a cob temple. Now, this is something that she did completely on her own, which I am still mesmerized by. If you don't know what cob is, it's very similar to adobe. It's made out of clay, sand, straw, water, and in adobe, I believe it's more done by bricks, whereas cob is really using your hands to physically mold things together. And she's using these different reclaimed materials, some of which I just mentioned, but she has these beautiful things built into the cob. So beautiful pieces of glass. She has these various windows, and it is really a little temple for herself. She uses sacred geometry. Lots of love went into this process. I believe she said it took her 2 years to do, but she's creating a space for her to meditate and connect with nature. And like I said, it's very impressive. One of those things you have to go back and watch. So Kim, thank you for showing us your process. Ruth out of California shows us how an area in Tamales Bay, California, it's not only a unique hiking adventure, but she went out and saw this whole area where endangered coho salmon are being protected. Their whole habitats are being protected. So we learned a little bit more about these efforts and why they're important. In fact, the land that they were on was founded, this area, in 1980. And it was devoted to land conservation and regenerative agriculture. And so the people there, they actually hiked to the creek to learn more about the salmon. And she shows us the whole process. Adaria out of Montana takes us to a veterans park. This is in Darby, Montana, that honors the service of veterans with one of the largest memorials in the region. And one of the things that Daria mentioned that I thought was very interesting is that Montana has the highest per capita of veterans in America. So for the amount of people there, they have the most veterans. And this particular memorial is for all branches of the military. Kind of a nice story to do around July 4th, right? All right. And Mira from Canada, she takes us to this screening of a new documentary. It's called Why Can't We Talk About This? I feel that way about most things, right? Why are certain things censored? Why can't we just talk about this? It premiered in Hamilton, Canada, and it explores the controversial topic of adverse reactions to the COVID-19 vaccines. It features personal stories and expert insights, and it calls for open discussion and further research on vaccine impacts. hence the title. Why can't we talk about this, right? She also says there was a live Q&A session afterward. And what was interesting is there was a blend of people there. So it wasn't just people that were anti-vax. She said that there were people that fell into that category. There were also people who had taken the vaccine. There were people that were kind of in the middle and just wanted more information. But she said it was very respectful and open, which is encouraging. And finally, Liz and John out of Australia take us to this area of Australia, and it's called the Forest of the Fallen. This kind of goes along with the previous story about this documentary because this is an area that is giving a voice to the silenced. It has been embraced by the people, also heavily censored, but basically they have these, I believe it's like a photo of a person with some additional information about them, but all of the people that are featured on these little posters, and then they have these little kind of like sticks that go into the ground. These are the people that have been impacted by the COVID-19 vaccinations, and their stories have been shared online in various ways, but they have also been censored. And so this is trying to raise awareness. And like I said, it's located in Australia. It's called the Forest of the Fallen. All right, now it's time for some of the more in-depth stories that the team and I worked on and released this week for you guys. We're going to kick things off with talking about some backlash that companies are getting regarding AI. So companies that rush to replace workers with AI are starting to get some not so positive feedback from their customers. In fact, they are getting pushback against cost-cutting moves that sacrifice human connection. Klarna and Duolingo, two brands that embraced aggressive AI strategies, are now backpedaling after users complained about declining service and impersonal experiences. Research shows people are uncomfortable when AI fully replaces human roles, and younger generations are especially concerned about job prospects.
The reality is we have to remember AI is just very sophisticated pattern recognition. It's incredibly powerful and can perform some tasks, even in fact some strategy games, better than people. But at the end of the day, it is people that is building AI. And it's incumbent upon us to think about what are the risks of that system? How are we building it in a way that empowers people rather than replaces them? Everybody involved with AI products, whether they're building them, deploying them, or using them, have a responsibility to make sure that they're operating in an ethical way. For users, that means really being able to step back and saying, what is the intended use of this system? Do I know how to properly use it? Do I know the limitations? Do I know the assumptions embedded within it?
Experts say the answer isn't ditching AI, but using it responsibly to enhance, not replace, the human touch. Some small businesses are already getting that balance right, proving that thoughtful use of technology builds trust without losing what makes a brand truly personal. New York City is taking big steps to clean up its streets and tackle its massive trash problem, but progress hasn't come without challenges.
What you see when you look at the street in New York closely is trash. There's trash all over the place. When you watch sanitation workers pick up trash, you realize how many things they're dealing with all the time. Like the cars are parked very tight, so they have to drag bags between cars. Oftentimes they can't roll bins between cars, or they're dragging trash kind of through tree pits. Part of the, problem here is that if you've ever been driving in New York City and you're stuck behind a trash truck, you just got to sit. And you sit and you wait, and then people start to get impatient, and then they honk, and the cars back up. In 1968, there was a sanitation workers strike. This strike went on for more than a week. And while this was happening, the plastics industry dropped a whole bunch of plastic bags on the city. It was like a new invention at the time. You used to have to put your trash in a can, in a kind of metal, loud Oscar the Grouch trash can. But after the strike, sanitation workers thought the bags were easier to sling. They could drag them between cars easier. They weren't loud.
From new rules requiring rodent-proof bins to a citywide composting mandate, efforts to cut waste and fight off rats are showing some success, like a drop in rat sightings and cleaner sidewalks. But confusion over composting rules, fines for noncompliance, and the controversial rollout of large sidewalk trash containers are stirring debate amongst residents. While the city is aiming for a cleaner, safer future, the road to reform is complicated, costly, and still a work in progress. Rare earth minerals are essential to modern technology, but their production comes with hidden costs, especially in regions like Myanmar, where mining has caused severe environmental damage and harmed local communities. While China dominates global rare earth production and processing, much of the labor and pollution happens elsewhere, with places like Myanmar's Chipui region suffering from contaminated water, lost livelihoods, and poor infrastructure.
In recent years, rare earth mines have appeared across Myanmar's northern mountains at an alarming rate. Toxic chemicals are injected into the hillside, causing heavy rare earth elements to be leached from the land. From 2021 to 2023, Myanmar's exports of rare earths to China, where they are processed, has more than doubled. This supply is coming from often unregulated and in some cases illegal mines, and it is having a devastating impact on communities and the environment. Workers from across the region have reported health issues including coughing, skin conditions, and kidney problems. And the chemicals they work with have reached the streams where people once drank and fished.
The problem extends beyond rare earths to other lucrative resources, like jade and gold, where unregulated mining supports corruption and leaves lasting ecological harm. These industries may power our devices and symbolize wealth, but behind the shine lies a reality of exploitation and environmental destruction that demands greater awareness and accountability. A proposed U.S. remittance tax is sparking intense debate, with lawmakers considering a small fee on money sent abroad, something millions of immigrants do regularly to support loved ones. Part of the broader One Big Beautiful Bill Act, the measure is intended to boost federal revenue, but critics argue it unfairly targets vulnerable communities and could lead to privacy concerns or drive people toward unregulated methods. With remittances making up a large chunk of some countries' economies, like Mexico, any added costs could ripple far beyond U.S. borders. Honeybush tea, a caffeine-free plant native to South Africa and long used by indigenous Khoi and San communities, has become a global health trend. But the people who've traditionally harvested it see very little of these profits. While big companies dominate processing and exports, local harvesters earn only a fraction of the final price, reflecting deep-rooted economic inequality tied to colonialism, apartheid, and land displacement.
This was Soweto.
It's been 30 years since the end of apartheid, the structural system of racial segregation that nearly ripped South Africa apart.
We are going forward. The march towards freedom and justice is irreversible.
But for many black South Africans, the story of optimism and renewal associated with Nelson Mandela's coming to power has not materialized. 30 million people, well over half the population, is still living in poverty. While apartheid is long gone, forms of segregation remain due to the vast economic disparity between the majority black and the minority white populations.
Efforts like South Africa's benefit sharing agreements aim to fix this discrepancy with the honeybush profits, but critics say they often favor elites over everyday workers. Without stronger protections, fairer policies, and more inclusive leadership, indigenous communities will continue to do the hardest work for the smallest reward. Well, being the oldest child, especially the eldest daughter, means carrying a heavy load of responsibility from an early age, a dynamic known as oldest child syndrome. While firstborns in wealthier countries may enjoy academic and career advantages, in lower income settings like Madagascar, they often sacrifice education and childhood to support their families. Cultural expectations frequently place caregiving roles on eldest daughters, leading to long-term mental health challenges, strained relationships, and a deep sense of being misunderstood.
Oldest daughter syndrome is when you were the firstborn daughter and you were conditioned to caretake or to please. Here are 4 signs you are this daughter. 1, you have to be a good girl. You have to be polite and repress how you actually feel to make sure everyone around you is comfortable. 2, you abandon your own needs. Your needs were never met or recognized, so you learn that they're not important and feel guilty and shameful for even having them. You might even feel like a burden and not know why. 3, you believe it's your responsibility to make sure that no one is ever upset or disappointed. This is called emotional monitoring. You never learn that adults are capable of disappointment, and it's not your role in life to manage the feelings of other adults. 4, you suppress your anger and rage. You suppress all of those emotions through food, scrolling on social media, drinking, or really anything else that helps you numb those uncomfortable feelings.
Experts recommend coping strategies like therapy, mindfulness, and self-compassion to help heal from these experiences and build healthier emotional lives. Calorie labels are meant to help us make healthier choices, right? Wink, wink, nod, nod. But research shows they might actually be making things more confusing. Studies reveal focusing too much on calorie counts can blur our understanding of what's truly nutritious. And even the labels themselves can be off by as much as 20%. Experts say weight management is about more than just calories in, calories out, with factors like metabolism and gut health playing key roles. While tracking apps and digital tools can help, they aren't always accurate and can lead to unhealthy obsessions.
Cal AI that says you can take a photo of your meal and it will know all the calories and macros, it doesn't work and it never will. Let me lay it out for you. You take a photo of a meal and the app doesn't know how much the meal weighs. It's not going to be accurate at all. Worst part is all of your favorite influencers are promoting it for money. They're getting a bag. I know people who don't agree with the app and are still promoting it because they're getting a bag. Also, get real. It's more expensive than MyFitnessPal, where you could take a photo of the barcode and it will actually be accurate. If you want to get into shape like this, you just can't take shortcuts like that. It's also not even a shortcut. It just lies to you. It's not even true.
Instead of fixating on numbers, experts suggest a more balanced, mindful approach to eating, one that focuses on how food makes us feel, not just what it adds up to. Euthanasia and assisted suicide remain some of the most emotionally charged and ethically complex issues in our world today. Countries like the Netherlands, Belgium, and Canada have legalized and expanded access under strict conditions, while others like the U.S. and U.K. remain cautious.
Belgium recorded unprecedented figures regarding euthanasia, nearly 3,500 cases in 2023. That is, of the people who died that year, 3 out of the 10 requested to die by this practice. This country was the second in the European Union to legalize euthanasia in 2002, and since then, cases have increased by 1,200%, going from 259 in its first year to 12 times that number in just 2 decades. In fact, initially, only terminally ill patients were eligible to request it, but since 2014, minors and, for example, people with Alzheimer's or serious mental illnesses have also been included.
At a certain age, or if you have a certain disease, if you have, a certain problem even.
Supporters of euthanasia say it offers dignity and relief from suffering, but critics warn it can shift societal values in troubling ways, especially for vulnerable groups like the elderly or people with disabilities. In places like Canada, where euthanasia is now offered even to those not terminally ill, the line between compassion and cost-cutting has become increasingly blurred, sparking concern from human rights groups and the international community. Bot farms are quietly reshaping the internet, and not in a good way. These massive networks of fake accounts, often controlled by software and sometimes backed by governments, can flood social media with spam, twist online debates, and even influence elections by making fringe ideas look mainstream.
Russia just got caught running a bot farm that spreads disinformation to Americans. Russia is super good at this kind of hacking and spreading of misinformation. It's a key part of their hybrid psychological warfare. But the U.S. Department of Justice just discovered a farm of 968 Twitter accounts that a Russian propaganda news outlet was using to spread misinformation. 968 Twitter accounts that looked like American people. It looked like it was just a human but it was really a Russian propaganda news outlet. The DOJ found that the Russian security services were directly overseeing this effort.
As bots now outnumber humans online, their impact is growing. From manipulating trends to spreading propaganda, spotting them isn't always easy, but learning how they operate is a crucial step in protecting yourself and the integrity of public conversation. Okay, here are some highlights from this week's Global Intelligence Agency reports. Kim Gogan is the head of the GIA and gives us regular updates on what's really happening on our planet. So, we had one official report go out, and this was on Monday, and it was a long one, guys. This was a 2-hour report. So if you get a chance, there's really only one video that you need to go back and watch this week. So check out Monday's video by the time this podcast episode comes out. If you're not already a member, just wait an extra day, and it should be released on YouTube and Rumble. I'm going to play several sound bites for you because 2 hours is a long time, and there was a ton of information released. Let's start by talking about July 4th. So this was the week of July 4th, a really big day in the United States. It's when we celebrate our alleged independence, although when you know what we know, you know that we are not free, that we have been slaves for a very, very long time. Not just people in the U.S., all of humanity has been slaves. So, in the U.S., though, there is a lot of back and forth about, at least there was earlier this week, about something called, I might mess up this name, the Big Beautiful Bill. Maybe there's another B in there that I'm missing. I'm not sure. So this was a huge bill regarding finances. Well, it was a big bill as far as the amount of pages too, but the amount of money that was needed to fulfill the things in this bill, and this was something Trump was really pushing for, the Republicans were really pushing for. Kim talks a little bit more about this and why this is kind of being timed out with July 4th. Now, as I'm doing this report, it's already July 6th. I can tell you that what we saw play out in mainstream news was that the Senate made a bunch of changes to it and sent it back down to the House of Representatives, who passed it. So as of now, the time that I'm recording this, the bill has passed. But we know that just because you pass a bill does not mean you have the funds to pay for it. And it's in the title of the bill. This big, beautiful bill and all the money that's supposed to be available. Well, if you really were to open up this bill and really look at it, which no one does, they just give you some highlights, and you know that that's not the only thing in the bill. There would be a lot of things in it that would lead us into World War III. And we don't think that's a really good thing. We don't want to have war anymore. We don't want to have disease and all of their control systems. And that's essentially what this bill would allow for. So the idea was they were trying to kick the can to July 4th. Well, why July 4th? Is it just because there's fireworks and it's a pretty day and we're going to celebrate the United States? No. There is a much darker agenda behind this and a reason they chose that date. So the first soundbite that I want to play is Kim explaining a little bit more about this bill and also why it was important, because I felt like they were just dragging this thing out forever, right? You know, people were filibustering and just standing there for hours. I think some people even set records for just mindlessly talking on the congressional floor. So what in the world is all of this about? As it turns out, July 4th was a date in the past where the budget, not just for the U.S., I'm talking about the deep state budget, was supposed to come out, and when that comes out, people get paid. So now things are starting to make a little bit more sense, right? You've got this big, beautiful bill. They're expecting to get paid and fund all their nefarious purposes. So here's Kim with more.
On the 4th of July, 2012, I actually did assign one of these global budgets, and it was a 10-year budget. That brought us to 2022, in which case they then did have a 10-year extension. That money was spent long before 2022. They were very unhappy and upset about that, and they've been trying to get me to do more ever since. Well, that's not going to happen. Now, I adhered to the fact that I unknowingly gave them a 10-year extension. What I mean by that is, well, It didn't feel right when I was doing it, and I thought it didn't feel right because I thought it was odd that I'm assigning trillions of dollars to the CIA. That felt very uncomfortable to me. But it was only really from the standpoint, at least I thought at the time, oh my God, I hope this is real and I hope this is right, because if it's not right, then, I'm going to be in serious trouble here. I sign money to the treasuries of the world, including the U.S. Treasury, Federal Reserve, you name it, the federal banking system, and all was right with the world with these people because nobody had gotten anything since 2007. So I started scratching my head at the time, and I'm like, this doesn't sound right. But I did it anyway because I thought I was doing my quote-unquote job. Come to find out later that was not the case. Everybody else claimed this money, that they were responsible for bringing it in. So there's some kind of correlation between the 4th of July, what we're seeing happening now, which didn't happen any other 4th of July, by the way, in the last decade, that I know of, for sure. So this is something new. As far as the budget money, every year this time, everybody keeps asking me, behind the scenes when I first got here, and, many calls later, from various organizations all asking for money on this day, but I haven't done it since. And so that was the first and only and last time there was ever any kind of global budget. Are they going to receive a ridiculous amount of money on the 4th of July? No, they are not. Do they believe there might be a hope this time versus any other time? I would guess. Omniversal simulations are an interesting thing. And we'll talk about that more in a minute here. But nonetheless, this big, beautiful bill is going to scuffle around, until the 4th of July, in which case by the 4th of July, it's going to scuffle around some more because there'll be nothing and no money coming out for this bill or any other bill. Now, this bill contains a lot of things that you would probably not like if you were an American citizen and a taxpayer. I'm sure if you were in other countries within the Middle East and you were in Eastern Europe, you would probably also not like this bill because that would mean that you would be in the middle of a war, a very hot and heavy war. They believe that this big, beautiful bill is going to pay for World War III to get the humans back in line, to get us to accept things like, agenda. Well, now it's 2025, I guess, 2030, the whole ID, you got to get microchipped, all of these kinds of things in order to exist on this planet, or you cease to exist on this planet. So there is a lot more behind this beautiful bill, which is kind of why I bring it up, but that's what you can expect to see regarding that. So the rest of it is all noise. They are trying to make Vance look like he's the hero, like he got them to pass it. He gave the final vote. And this just has to do with the agenda of the SSP, or Secret Space Program operatives. Because you see, they know they're touting around a fake orange man in the White House, and it's only a matter of time before they'd like to get rid of the fake orange man agenda and put together a president that's breathing, and I guess that would be Vance for a time. And remember, Vance has been promised a lot of positions himself, and I'm sure one of them is being upright if he continues to do this job. So if that were to happen, you would see the face front, probably some kind of martyr assassination sort of thing of Trump, like JFK style, I should say, not Junior. And, the world would mourn and blah, 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 and here you go. And now you got Vance. So I don't know, it's with these political operatives, they know politics. They know how to take over countries. This is what they believe they know how to do. They forget that there's a hidden hand, and always has been a hidden hand behind the scenes, pushing things along and making things happen and pushing the final buttons. I am fully well aware of what has been happening in Iran and Iraq and in the Middle East and Israel and all this Netanyahu show and all of these things. But the bottom line is really the political operatives do what political operatives do. Political operatives believe that they orchestrate coups. They also believe they orchestrate the financial downfall of countries. They also believe that they win wars. They start a war, start a plague, it all goes in a cookie cutter fashion that has been designed for them like actors in a movie. It's a script. Here's how you take over a country 101. And this is what they are pursuing in the Middle East right now. They believe, and they were supposed to, the last time they were supposed to get a hold of some money, that they were going to announce that Khomeini was dead, and then they were going to insert their new Pope, Islamic Pope guy known as the Imam. Obviously, there's nobody announced dead. They're still playing it up a lot in the media. There's a lot of chatter behind the scenes, in other news channels in let's just say within the Middle East and social media channels, that he's very ill. They don't know if he's going to make it. And this is all in preparation for their big alleged win that's going to happen on the 4th of July, which won't actually happen.
Now, we have not had an update from Kim since that report came out, but if they had received any money, I'm sure we would know about it. So it's safe to assume that that did not happen, and I'm going to share with you some other information that she gave us later on in the week that also confirms that. But let's continue with Monday's report. Okay, I also want to talk about the deep underground military bases. One of the things that has happened quite a bit is Kim, with the Golden Age AI, has been able to take out a lot of what she refers to as their space junk. Okay, it's stuff that's in the way. It's not helpful for humanity. And what's frustrating is she will clear an area of space junk, and then soon after, it's like it just reappears again. Well, as it turns out, this is because of simulations, which we've been talking a lot about. We are trying to remove all of these simulations. And Kim says there's simulation on top of simulation. Imagine just stacks and stacks of simulations, and we are involved in all of this. So here's another soundbite with Kim talking about these DUMBs and how they're part of these simulations, these deep underground military bases, and how she will remove a bunch of stuff and then it just shows up again.
Deep underground military bases. We need to talk about these a little bit today because there's a lot of misunderstanding of what a deep underground military base is and how they work. And we have been to many times, some of them, and yet they keep coming back. It's like Norfolk, Virginia. Norfolk, Virginia is a favorite location of the deep state and our military, which is 100% owned like a dog by the deep state. They do whatever the deep state says, Langley 5 and otherwise. They are a dog. So they are not, maybe they're even the tail of a dog, because they do whatever those people tell them to do. Doesn't matter how many of them they kill and how many American citizens they kill, but it's the same not only here in America, it is the same in Russia. I know this for a fact. I can tell you with 100% certainty because I have been and seen one of those bases with my own eyeballs, standing on the ground, not remote viewing, not using skills. I stood there. I watched the people go in and out. It was very snowy at the time, and I know what is there. I also know what is in Crimea. I know that because I have been there. I also know about places in China, and I know that because I have been there. Indonesia, the same. Philippines, the same. That temple that everybody talks about, amongst the RV circles and the Philippine elders and blah, blah, blah. Well, they all go to the same hole in the grounds, let me say plural. Mount Denali here in the States. Los Angeles is another one underneath the entire state of Washington in the U.S. Oregon, Nevada. There's really no place on this earth including the ocean, where there isn't a potential deep underground military base at any given moment in time. So with deep underground military bases, please understand, they are now you see it, now you don't. Sometimes they exist elsewhere. Sometimes that same base can exist here. And all of this has to do with various simulations and overlays. Why does the deep state like their alignments so much? Well, they enjoy their alignments because what it does is it implements another overlay. Now, when you and I think of a simulation, we think of pilots that might go into this machine and learn how to drive or fly a plane, I should say, or a helicopter or something like that. You know, that would be a simulation. We also now have virtual reality games where you put on these glasses and you can see a simulation. You're playing a tennis game. Maybe you're shooting people in a war, you know, through one of these virtual reality games. But in the case of a simulation, simulations to you appear very real. It's almost like that little avatar you move around in that virtual reality actually is your reality. You are in a part and take a part of various simulations which can change with various planetary alignments, or could have. Also various periods of time. So when I said to you, you know, gee, I'm really sick and tired of cleaning space junk, as an example. And then, you know, I clean it all up, and then 2 days later, there's more space junk. A lot of this has to do with which overlay you're looking at. Now, when we were kids, you might remember, now this is when dinosaurs roamed the earth. I mean, kind of after those really smelly mimeograph machines, which we were so excited, by the way, to be able to go make the copies with, and till our hands were purple. You probably remember this from grade school if you're listening to this, or even after. But we moved on to other than the blackboard, and then, you know, as we got a little bit older, at least in my generation, us Gen Xers, because Gen X rules, by the way. Now I don't want to call it X anymore. Let's call it our generation, you know, a generation of some of you listening. So this, as we got a little older, maybe got into high school or middle school, we had these interesting looking projectors. Now these were also used in, for example, the workplace at that time. And they would pull down a white screen, and there was a little box, and it had a light on the top, and they would put these cellophane papers on top of these boxes. And they would tell you, you know, oh, this is, and sometimes they would draw on them, you know, and here are the math problems you need to solve, or, you know, as if we were in school, or it would be a presentation to a board if you were, you know, in the workplace at that time. Then they could throw another piece of cellophane on top of that, on top of the other one that's already there, and there would be new markings that would tell more of the story or of the presentation. So if you're old enough, you remember these machines. They were from, you know, the 80s, and we used them quite a bit until we came up with more sophisticated things that were available to us, because they were always available elsewhere to other folks. So this is how we did our presentations and whatnot, you know, back in those days. And simulations kind of look like that. So if you were to live, so to speak, in one of those pieces of cellophane paper or plastic, clear plastic, that they would put on top of the light, everything in your world looks real. That's where you are. That's where you live. You know, for humans, it's a little bit different in Earth, in the sun and the moon, because you live in several of those pieces of paper all at the same time, or these cellophane pieces. Now, what happens when there's an alignment or there's a specific date that they're promised something is going to happen or whatever, another piece of cellophane comes and overlays our cellophane we know as Earth. And now you all of a sudden have things that are appearing, more writing that would appear that wasn't there before. And by writing, I mean, for example, an entire deep underground military base. But just poof, here it is. Because there now is another simulation within your simulation. And they would stack these things into infamy, not only as it relates to Earth, but also in the omniverse. And as the seas of time, and we're going to talk about this here, as the seas of time would change, meaning time is a creation, it is a current, it is basically the current of death. Time causes death and degeneration. But as the seas continue to turn, you start to see more and more overlays. You kind of pick them up. Like if you've ever been walking down a really windy street and all of a sudden a piece of paper, a newspaper sticks to your face. Have you ever had that happen? And then all of a sudden all the rest of the newspaper keeps coming at you. And before you know it, you've got half the daily news stuck to your face, It's kind of like that. Just keeps layering and layering and layering and layering, and then all you see is the words on there. But you're a part of it instead of it actually just hitting you.
So this was mind-blowing to me. Because when you think about time, I always wondered, okay, so Source, God, creator of the universe, exists outside of time. I have known that for a very long time. Even Christianity teaches you that. So why? Why are we separated from Source? Why can't we be right where Source is? And it makes perfect sense to me that time, something that degrades, right? Because as you advance in your life, time, there's that word again, you get older and older, and eventually, you get to a point where you pass away. You move on to the next thing that your soul encounters. But why? Why is that? And so it was really mind-blowing for me to realize that time is a simulation, and that was never something Source intended. So I want to talk about that a little bit more. There's another soundbite that I'm going to play. Kim does get out her whiteboard, so you'll probably hear her marking on her whiteboard, writing on her whiteboard as she's talking. But I just thought it was really important to hit this point home about time being a simulation, and these new simulations happen all of the time. I don't know how to not use that word. It happens days, months, weeks, hours, seconds, and it's just simulation on top of simulation.
So to you, say this is you, terrible writing. Okay, so this is you, and you're looking at a tree. The tree, is if it's spring where you're at or the beginning of summer, as it is in the northern hemisphere, the tree to you looks whole, it looks lush, it's probably got the beginnings of fruit on the tree. If it's a fruit tree, the leaves are green, and you think, okay, well, it's summer, So automatically we begin to do all of the summer things. The weather changes. All of these types of things happen, in the beginning of summer. It starts to get warmer. If you're in the southern hemisphere, it's starting to get colder. Well, what if I told you all of that is a simulation? It is merely an overlay on this planet. So a few months from now, if you're in the northern hemisphere, this tree is going to look a whole lot different. It's going to look like the leaves are falling on the ground. They're turning orange, and brown and pretty colors. The weather changes where you're at. It's getting cooler now. And what if I told you that simulation changes every day? Every single day, there's a new layer that's put on you. Now, some of these are continuous simulations, such as aging. Each simulation communicates with the other simulation. So there are days, I'm sure, where you wake up and you think, boy, I look well rested today. Wow, that's great. Or, I'm 23 years old and I look great, that kind of thing. And other things also get implemented during these daily and yearly and seasonal and varying alignments, and all of these are all simulations on your simulation. So the older you get, the more simulations you are present in. What feels like the present or the progression of quote unquote time to you is merely a simulation. That includes things that happen to your vessel. One day you're healthy and the next day you've got a cold, because in the next day simulation you have a virus. So it adds an overlay to your person. Now, your consciousness exists in the now, in the present, but it also exists in every single simulation simultaneously. Now, some people will say you create the world you live in. Well, not exactly. As you create within simulations, the simulation also creates to counteract you. So, in other words, you can go to the gym, you can work out, you can do all these anti-aging treatments and all of these things, but they don't last long. They might last for, 6 months or 7 months or whatever it is, and then you have to, or a year or two, and then you have to do the things again or whatever it is to change your person. Now, if you get, for example, an arm in one simulation, say your arm was cut off in the war, and we have a time goes by, so to speak, and you receive a new arm because we have new technology that creates that arm for you. You will continue in the multiple simulations that you are in to have that new arm, but other things might happen to you as you move along in the simulation. So you exist in every single one. So as another layer is put on top of you, so to speak, it continuously is creating the new you constantly, whether that's an illness or a heart attack, or it could even be your environment. The seasons change. Seasons are artificial overlays on Earth. These are simulations. Now, there are many different simulations going on here on Earth at the same time, okay? Because this is about you. I do these reports for you. So you have an understanding of what the matrix really is, or what a simulation really is. So you are an organic being. You've got this vessel, and in order for them to manipulate said vessel, they will keep inserting all these simulations on top of simulations, and they happen daily, hourly, seasonally. They happen monthly. They happen yearly. They happen every 1,008 years. There's a new one, and then there's one that happens every 2016 years. So you have what we call minor and major simulations that create the world that you live in. And by the world, we have Earth, sure, but your feet literally are not permitted to touch the ground. Believe it or not, you are levitating. You're not levitating. You're actually walking in a simulation. Simulations, when we all think of a simulation, we think of things like the virtual reality playing tennis game. But it's not. When it's an actual simulation of creation, in part by your own consciousness, because they say, you create who you are. If you think you're sick and tired, then you're sick and tired. And that's in part true, because your consciousness exists in the next minute, in the next day, in the next month, in the next year here on Earth. But each simulation that exists, each overlay that exists from the virtual 1980s, looking projector thing that I told you about, it looks like a box, and then, you had this little piece that comes out, and, this is where that projector would be, kind of thing. And then you would come in and you would put these pieces of cellophane on there, and then you would put another one on there and another one, and part of the reason why we age is because we have too many time simulations that we're living in. It's exhausting, to power all of these with your own consciousness and your own energy. Unfortunately, it's what we have had to deal with for a long period of time. So those days where you're kind of dragging, it probably means that there's another simulation being created.
Very interesting, right? You ever feel those days where it's just dragging, and we know that they were stealing our energy for a very long time anyways, and then all of these simulations on top of it, and because you are human, you exist in all of these different realities. This should also be a really good example for us. Like, I know that's dastardly, but it's also a good reminder of how powerful you are. So when you hear this stuff, don't feel defeated. Turn that on its head and realize, wow, what could you possibly do if your energy, your essence, your being wasn't being pulled in all of these different directions? Okay, moving on. I got 2 more sound bites for you guys because I'm telling you, it was a jam-packed episode. And Kim talks about a lot more than what I'm going to go over. She talks about who the creators of the simulation were. So if you want to know more about that, the specific names of the beings. She talks a little bit more about timelines because those are really time simulations. Again, light bulb moments, right? But this next soundbite that I want to play for you guys is about how these simulations, she actually starts to call them sims, how these sims affect us now.
Let's talk about how simulations affect us right now, and all the things we hear and all the things we see and all the things we do, because this is the important part. Okay. People. We know certain people have organically died, but yet they're still here and they're still on TV. They might not look quite the same because simulations aren't perfect. Sims. If they can't create, because see, sometimes things happen, because remember, simulations are created outside of time, and you never know when something outside of the norm is going to happen. So if you were a simulation creator that created in Earth's time something 100,000 years ago, 200,000 years ago, or how about 100,000 years in the future, that can happen, you see, because it's a simulation. However, unexpected occurrences sometimes happen with the organic people living in an inorganic simulation. Sometimes the house isn't there anymore. Sometimes things actually do occur naturally and things disappear, and they're not necessarily a simulation issue. There are things that disrupt the simulation, which is why weird things happen. And now you've got a bunch of political people wearing a mask as an example, because no one could reinsert them the next day, the last second, the next 3 days back into the simulation. There's a time frame for souls and, manipulation, and when our souls stop going to a place where the simulation could control them, the simulation we know is the false heaven, that's when the whole clone thing kind of started to fall apart. Because there's no bucket of souls. You can't just put someone right back here, even the quote-unquote chosen ones of the deep state. It just doesn't work out that way because there's no way for the simulation to affect what exists in the now at this time. Does that make sense? Now, what happens when a major simulation is about to occur? We have what is going on right now. This is why the deep state is chasing after it like kids in a candy store. I mean, unfreaking believable. So, because simulations are falling apart, it is more difficult to implement a new simulation. This is what the deep state fails to understand. When I told you, now you see it, now you don't, now you see it, now you don't. That's because Marduk's consciousness is failing, as an example. Now, it's not just Marduk, it's Marduk's created simulations that run on consciousness of his. Okay, might be of Michael's, might be of somebody else's, who knows. But they create the realities that are trying desperately to overlay this planet. Now, Marduk, as I told you, this is important to understand, saw me as an enemy, saw me as someone he needed to control, which is why he spent all that time with me. Because he needed to understand how I work. And as I worked with him, he would actually register that thought. Oh, look, if I tell Kim, no money for you, she's going to do this. If I tell Kim, that, she can't do this or she can do that, or, oh, well, do you want that? Then he would program it into the upcoming simulations. Dastardly, isn't it? It's the same thing with the entire human race. They watch, they observe, and they create simulations in order to keep you a slave. Same goes for any organic members of the deep state. Congratulations, we're all in the same boat, swimming in the same damn river. So better put on your big boy and big girl panties, deep state people, because you are stuck the same way we are. Now, they used to have these escape routes. We're going to talk about that in a second, but they used to have these escape routes so they could leave and come back and leave and come back, because some people, like the SSP folks, are aware somewhat about simulations. They could leave the overlays of simulations for 100 years or 50 years or whatever, and then come back into the simulation. You ever wonder why some of them look exactly the same? Well, that's why, because they didn't actually die. They just left the simulations, the hundreds of them that exist here on the earth, and they go to a time of no time, or a nil, or sometimes they call it nowhere, everywhere, anywhere, whatever, but I call it a nil, a time of no time, time of no time. So they go to one of these places, and that's where they hang out for a while. They still somewhat connected to the vessel that's here. Something ugly would come back in its place, play the part for all the simulations, and then, they'd be able to switch out. And that's why, you ever wonder why we live to a certain age and the deep state, congratulations, here's your 110th birthday, and we don't get that. Well, part of the reason for that is because there's things like stasis, or you go into a nil, or, your soul comes out. You can do repairs. You can do all kinds of things in these various places. Why certain people look like they don't age, or whatever, it's all part of the simulation. There are rules to coming and going from a simulation, but a lot of them, especially the SSP, do not adhere to those rules. So they'll leave at the age of 21, come back 100 years later, and still be 21 years old. Because remember, if you're outside a simulation, simulations equal age. These people go out for 100 years, doesn't matter. They're technically 121 years old, and then they come back, and here you go. That's why the archivist, said, oh yeah, I'm 161 years old, or whatever, they told Tom. Well, is that possible? Sure, absolutely, because you're not in the simulation every single day, all day. Sometimes you leave the simulation, sometimes you come back. Sometimes you can go forward or back. This is what's known as, in their world, as time travel. You know, you hear about a few things on the internet. Oh my God, there's Putin in World War II, and look at him today, looks the same, blah, blah, blah. It's what they call time travel. Time travel is when you go back and forth between various simulations. You can spend time out of it in a nil for a while, but you go back and forth. And, you know, and a lot of them, because they are aware, or they believe they're aware of an upcoming simulation, they will act accordingly. In other words, they will try to go into what they call safe zones or SOFONs, hoping that the simulation will pass. And they can stay in there long enough to let it pass. SOFONs, you know, are technically in their world, you know, you're actually going into another a nil. There's nil SOFONs, and then there's other simulations where it's like you skip over that song on an old 33 record and you go to 2 songs over. So you've skipped the part where everybody gets overlaid in a simulation with a virus. You know exactly what one we're talking about here. So yeah, all of us get sick, all of us have all these things, and it's being created more and more every day, you know, but this is where simulations glitch, because remember, you know, this is how I played and learned how to play the simulation. So Marduk, I knew, and we knew, because it's written in books in 1984, you know, that this was going to happen. People are getting a greater connection to source right now, whether they know it or they don't know it. They can choose to ignore it, or they can choose to pay attention to it and listen. But a lot more people are not believing the baloney they're being fed. Therefore, the consciousness that took place during a virus simulation, let's call it, was starting to override the consciousness of the creator. In this case, say it's Marduk. Now, because the consciousness of the light, remember I tell you, hold the love, hold the light, hold the love, hold the light, you know, because the consciousness is overriding the simulation, and there's no being to create the simulation the next day. This is why it was so important to take out the realms, the kings, to not have those realms belong to those folks anymore, because they can no longer change or alter a currently running simulation. Therefore, you as human beings have more power now as a group. So the more of you that believe in one thing or another, the more you can change how the simulation is going to affect you. Pretty incredible, right? So that because the virus simulation, let's call it the virus simulation, is worldwide. It's happening everywhere. People know something is wrong. A lot of people started to realize something is wrong. You know, the toilet paper crisis, the orchestrated thing, truck drivers coming out and telling you that there's really no toilet paper shortage. Look at this warehouse. Then you got other people coming out and telling you there's no shortage of eggs. Look at all these eggs. They told me to just let them go bad because they didn't want them in the store. Now we have an egg shortage and the price goes up. They're having a very hard time maintaining the believability of what's really happening. Now, think about this, because it's important for you to understand how these things work until they're completely gone. And we're probably more than 75% of the way there. That doesn't mean they don't exist anymore.
So when you hear 75%, it's like, okay, we're almost there. We're almost there. But also keep in mind, we have been maintaining this for a very long time. Not that we want to maintain it, but just know we're going to be okay. This isn't new stuff. We are just learning how all of this functioned. but it's not like it's new stuff that's happening to us. However, there is a new simulation that started a couple weeks ago, believe it or not. Kim is calling it Battleground Earth, and it is the fight to control Earth. And of course, this came from Marduk. So let's learn more about this new simulation.
Thursday, things really ramped up with a new simulation that was created by Marduk called Battleground Earth, and it is the fight to control Earth. Battleground Earth created simulations, deep underground military bases, space junk everywhere, crazy thoughts in the deep state's head, chasing carrots, chasing carrots, chasing carrots. So now we've got actually, humans fighting humans. The deep state hates us, we hate them, okay, there you go. Now we've got a mess on Earth. The deep state thinks they're going to be getting a system because some AI planted the thought in their head that this is a great idea, and look at that. Oh, look, there's a spark of it somewhere. Go get that carrot, go get the carrot, hack it, hack it, hack it. And in reality, it's not real. It's just a simulation. So if you know the key to the simulation, and you now have the keys to the simulations, most of them, not all of them, you now understand, oh, look, there's a Battleground Earth. Okay, let's take over that simulation, which we've done in the last few hours. So we have been in control of the other side of the humans, deep state, existence, more than they know. More than they know. Can their consciousness override the human consciousness? Nah, not so much anymore. It's fading. Why is it fading? Because remember, every simulation we find that appears out of time is connected immediately to source. So source will say, source wants us to live in a certain way. Source wants creation. Source says, look, you can only defend your life or the life of an innocent, in this particular case. And the deep state is doing the exact opposite of that. Therefore, source is going to listen to his organic creations, Earth included here, before it listens to the deep state. Because the deep state, it wants to try to use a simulation that is no longer for them against us. So will the Galactic Federation be appearing again? Doubt it. Those that left, left. Those that came, and that's it. You find the rest of the battleground where they hide out, where the base root of the simulation is. And then you start to alter the simulation so they don't exist anymore. How cool is that?
So all of that was part of Monday's update. And we intended to have more reports throughout the week, but things happened. Okay, so I want to read to you a couple of the brief updates that Kim was able to put out on our Telegram thread. So this came out for Wednesday. Good day. Progress continues on simulation fronts for the last few days. Today we have been working on finishing off the mirrors. Good news is reality, where we are, is getting clearer and clearer without all the simulation overlays. Halls or tunnels between reality and simulations are mostly gone. This includes virtual overlays on AI systems. Loads of mirrors have been removed, so that has left the deep state a little irritated tonight, to say the least. Incoming traffic into Durango is where Kim lives, in Colorado. Incoming traffic into Durango is very high right now for the last few hours. A very long story as to what they were/are expecting on the 4th. Okay, so that came out on Wednesday. Kim intended to do a report on Friday, and then on Friday, which again, Friday was the 4th of July. She just said we're expecting fireworks. And apparently the deep state did not want Kim to give us a report on Friday, because this was the message that went out. We plan to record GIA over the weekend, as Kim currently does not have internet access. Her internet is suspiciously not working, even though the rest of the street seems to have no issues. Thank you for your understanding and patience. So that is the last that we have heard from Kim. By the way, she's fine. It's not that anything's wrong with Kim, but that's the last official report that we received. So this week should be very interesting to see what happened with the 4th. Obviously, they didn't get any money, or we would be seeing a lot of deep state activity, and I don't believe that we've seen that. We would have seen wars started and all sorts of things. But what actually happened, and where are we at with all of these simulations? That is coming up this week. So I highly encourage you guys to stay tuned. You guys keep your eyes on the Telegram threads. If you're not already a member of United Network News, United Network, be sure to check out our website, unitednetwork.earth. If you become a member, that gives you instant access to all of our news updates, our New Earth interviews, all of the updates from Kim and the Global Intelligence Agency, and all things restoration. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today. This is The Rundown, and I'm Sunny Galt for United Network News, signing off.